not subscribed to our channel, you can do so by clicking the subscribe button as shown above. Hello friends, welcome to Kamath Astrology. In today's video, we will cover a very different topic. What is the area in your life that affects you the most? Many people have different types of problems. For example, some people have health issues. Someone's family member has a health issue. Someone has a job related issue. Someone does not get a job. Someone has marriage disputes. So, different people have different types of problems. And in this video, we will try to analyze what is the area that affects you most in life. And for this, we always need to look at the 8th Lord in the horoscope, the 8th Lord position in your birth chart, as well as which houses the 8th Lord is aspecting. Now you might be wondering why I am making a video suddenly on the 8th house, 8th Lord, and which area in life affects you the most. The reason is, very soon on the world front, we may see another warlike situation which is about to happen, and therefore it is very critical for us to know which area of our life will be affected most. Even if this war were not to happen, it is important that you should understand which is the most significant area of your life that will be affected. Now, in the horoscope, the 8th house represents many things. It represents accidents, it represents misfortunes, it represents occult science, it also represents gains through inheritance, gains through insurance. But the most important thing is the 8th house represents transformations. It represents sudden fluctuations, sudden ups and downs. And wherever the 8th Lord is placed in your chart, that is the area of your life where you will experience maximum amount of transformation or maximum amount of change. Now, if you consider the natural zodiac belt, Aries is the first house and Scorpio is the 8th house. So, Scorpio is the natural 8th house in the zodiac belt. So, in addition to considering the position of the 8th Lord from your ascendant sign, it is also important to consider the planets in Scorpio when you are considering transformation in your life or a major change in your life. Now, what happens when the 8th Lord is placed in the first house? The first house represents your physical body, it represents your physical self, and the 8th Lord in the first house represents that throughout your life you will undergo a lot of fluctuations, lot of ups and downs, lot of challenges, lot of transformations. So 8th Lord in the first house gives you a lot of challenges, lot of problems in life, especially if the 8th Lord is not well placed in the first house or is afflicted in the first house. In that case, the 8th Lord brings a lot of health issues, lot of multiple challenges in your life on all fronts. It also impacts your lifespan because the 8th Lord represents longevity, and when it is placed in the first house and it is not strong, then it will reduce your lifespan also. What happens when the 8th Lord goes in the second house? The second house represents your family, it represents your assets, it represents your speech. So when the 8th Lord is in the second house, it can bring about a lot of challenges within the family. You will face constant problems from your family members, and therefore your family life is constantly undergoing a lot of transformations, lot of upheavals. Now, one good thing is when 8th Lord is placed in the second house, at times it can give you a very huge inheritance. So 8th Lord in the second house can give gains through inheritance. If second Lord goes in 8th house, the same is also true. The eighth lord in the second house can cause you problems due to your own speech, due to the way you talk to others. So suddenly you may be very moody. At times you may be very good, and suddenly you may be very rash in your speech when the eighth lord goes in the second house and is weak or afflicted. What happens when the eighth lord goes in the third house? The third house is the house of siblings. It is the house of your own self effort. It is the house of short distance journeys. It also represents the subconscious mind. It also represents your ability to teach something online content creation. So when the eighth lord goes in the third house, and if it is well placed, then you can become very successful when you start some online business, online content creation. But the same eighth lord in the third house can give fluctuating relationships with your siblings, lot of challenges with respect to your siblings, and even to attain the smallest success you may have to put in a lot of efforts, because the third house also represents efforts. So eventually all this transforms you into a different person. What happens when the eighth lord goes in the fourth house? This is a very interesting thing. Fourth house is our home. Fourth house is our comfort zone. Fourth house is the conveyances available to us. Fourth house also represents our mother. And the eighth lord in the fourth house represents a lot of changes in the home environment. So your house or your home will undergo constant transformation. And when you run the dasha of the eighth lord, and the eighth lord is placed in the fourth house, you will be forced to change your home, to leave your home, and to go elsewhere. Now this can happen due to your job, because the eighth lord is also aspecting the 10th house when he sits in the fourth house. So in this chart you can see Saturn is the eighth lord who is ruling the sign of Capricorn for the Gemini ascendant, and Saturn is placed in the fourth house of Virgo. So whenever this native runs Shani Mahadasha, after some time in the Shani Mahadasha, he will be forced to change his home. He will be forced to leave his current place and relocate to another place, either due to a transfer in his job, or due to some problems happening in his job, or he himself might take such a decision that he will go and shift to another location due to certain job problems. So eighth lord in the fourth house will force you to change the house in its Mahadasha. And this will definitely happen. It happened even in Lord Ram's chart, where the eighth lord was in the fourth house and Lord Ram had to leave everything and go to Vanvas. He was about to be crowned as a king, but the very next day he had to leave everything and go for exile. So it happened all of a sudden. So this is a sudden thing which happens when you run the dasha of the eighth lord and the eighth lord is placed in the fourth house. Now it is also important to see which houses the eighth lord aspects. Those houses will also undergo a lot of fluctuations. For example, in this case, Saturn is the 8th as well as the 9th lord, and he is aspecting the 10th house of career. So this person's career will undergo a lot of challenges, lot of struggle, especially during the Shani Mahadasha, Shani Sadesati. Shani in the 4th house also aspects the 6th house of Scorpio. Now in a way this is good because it destroys enemies, but it gives this person a lot of hidden enemies. And Saturn also puts his 10th aspect on the ascendant. So this person has to work very hard in his life to attain success. Success will not come easily to him because Saturn will test him at every point. So you can see the 8th lord is influencing the 4th house, the 10th house, the 6th house as well as the ascendant. So you can imagine how challenging the life of such a person is. Now because the 8th lord is in the 4th house, mother's health can also suffer. If he is driving vehicles, he has to be careful while driving because 8th lord represents accidents. So if there is a malefic planet moving over the 8th lord, or the 8th Lord moves over a malefic planet, that is a time when accidents can occur for this person. So 8th Lord in the 4th house is very interesting. And if you really want to understand this, you should look at Lord Ram's birth chart. Now what happens when the 8th Lord goes in the 5th house and he is afflicted, he is weak. So the 5th house is the house of knowledge. It is the house of past good deeds. It is the house of speculation. It is the house of love and romance. It is also the house of children. Now when 8th Lord goes in the 5th house and he is not well placed there, your relationship with your children will always be problematic. You may have a breakup in your love life because the 8th Lord also represents separation. So separation from children, separation from your loved one can happen when the 8th Lord goes in the 5th house. Next thing is, you may even get a break in your education because the 8th Lord is in the 5th house. If you are indulging in speculative investments such as stocks, options, futures, and you have an 8th Lord placed in the 5th house, it can give you sudden fluctuations. That is, you may get suddenly lot of gains and then suddenly it will cause a downfall. So when 8th Lord is in the 5th house, be very careful when you are investing in speculative things. What happens when the 8th Lord is in the 6th house? This is a very good yoga. It is a Viparit Raj Yoga. Okay. So 8th Lord will destroy your enemies when it is in the 6th house. But again, the 8th house represents secrets, and therefore this can give you hidden chronic diseases which eventually you will be able to overcome. But you will face some challenges related to chronic diseases when the 8th Lord is in the 6th house. Also, there will be some challenges from hidden enemies who will eventually be overcome. What happens when the 8th Lord goes in the 7th house? 7th house is the house of business partnerships. It is the house of marriage. It is the house of relations. And therefore, when the 8th Lord goes in the 7th house, married life becomes a challenge if the 8th Lord is not well placed there. So it will bring about a lot of struggle in your married life, lot of struggle with business partners. What happens when the 8th Lord is in the 8th house? It is a very good placement. It gives you a very long life. And 8th Lord in the 8th house will also destroy all your problems, all your struggles, provided the 8th Lord is in a good position in that house. What happens when the 8th Lord is in the 9th house? 9th house is the house of foreign journeys. It is the house of father, gurus, teachers, divine knowledge, blessings. So when the 8th Lord goes in the 9th house, relationship with father, relationship with guru, relationship with teachers is always on a boil. It is always fluctuating. And the health of your father also may suffer when the 8th Lord goes in the 9th house. It also indicates some kind of misfortune in your life, because 9th house is the house of Bhagya. It is the house of destiny. It is the house of good fortune. And when the Lord of misfortune goes in this house, lot of challenges come in life. What happens when the 8th Lord goes in the 10th house? 10th house is the house of your profession, your career, your work area. So when the 8th Lord goes there, what happens? It is going to bring about lot of fluctuations, lot of ups and downs in your career, in your professional front. And such a person may constantly change jobs. Even if he does business, he will never get stability in life, because the past karma is such that the 8th Lord has come in the 10th house. And therefore, it is not giving you a stable career. So it can give you constant job switches, loss of job, sudden breaks in job. All these things will happen when the 8th Lord is in the 10th house, or the 10th Lord also goes in the 8th house. So whenever the 10th and the 8th are associated with each other, there will be fluctuations in your profession, in your work life, in your career. What happens when the 8th Lord goes in the 11th house? Now 11th house is the house of your wishes. It is the house of your aspirations. It is the house of desires. It is the house of friends. It is the house of gains. So when 8th lord goes in the 11th house, you can get sudden gain in wealth. You may also suddenly see that your friends change quite frequently. Your relationship with your elder brother can also undergo a lot of fluctuations because the 11th house represents the elder sibling. You may undergo a lot of fluctuations in your income because the 11th house is your gain, it is your income. And therefore your income constantly fluctuates when the 8th lord goes in the 11th house. What happens when the 8th lord goes in the 12th house? Now 12th house is the house of moksha. It is the house of isolation. It is the house of spirituality. It is the house of expenses. So when 8th lord goes in the 12th house, again it is a viparit rajyog in the sense that it destroys your losses. But the 8th lord in the 12th house can also give sudden problems, sudden accidents, and you may be very isolated in life. But one good thing is this draws you towards spirituality. It makes you more inclined to learn the divine knowledge. 8th lord in the 12th house can give sudden hospitalization, and it can also give you the power to overcome the problem that has come. Example, hospitalization. So 8th lord in the 12th house is good from a spiritual perspective, but it does increase the struggles in your life. So wherever the 8th lord is placed, that area of your life will undergo a lot of transformation. For example, if you see this chart for the Gemini ascendant, the 8th lord Saturn is placed in the 4th house. So this person's home life, his house environment will always undergo a lot of transformation. In the 8th lord Dasha, that is Shani Mahadasha, at some point he will have to leave his home and go and stay somewhere else. And this could be because the 8th lord is aspecting the 10th house. So because of a job change, or because of hidden enemies, because the 8th lord is also aspecting the 6th house. Or he may himself take a decision for his career because the 8th lord is also aspecting the ascendant. Now one interesting thing is, especially in this chart, Saturn is also the 9th lord of good fortune. He is also the 8th lord of misfortune. So which effect will be more prominent? Now because Saturn rules both the 8th and the 9th house in this case, he has to give you the effects of both the 8th house as well as the 9th house. And therefore, when Saturn, the 8th lord and the 9th lord is in the 4th house, during one phase of its Mahadasha, you will enjoy your home life very much. You will live closely with your father. But in the second phase, when Saturn starts showing the 8th house effect, that is when it will separate you from your father and move you to a different location. So in this case, when Saturn rules both the 9th and the 8th house and is gone in the 4th house, he will give both the effects but at different times throughout his Mahadasha. So this is one special combination wherein the 8th lord also rules the 9th house, and therefore it will give mixed effects throughout its dasha. So friends, wherever the 8th lord is placed in your chart, that is the area where you will experience maximum transformation and you will need to change yourself to fulfill your life purpose. So wherever the 8th lord is placed, it is also the area where you must serve the most. For example, when the 8th lord is placed in the 4th house, you must serve your mother. The 8th lord placement also tells you the purpose of your life. What are you born for? So when the 8th lord is placed in the 4th house, it means you need to serve your mother. You also need to help people, poor people, build their homes. In some way, you should contribute to help such people build their huts, their homes. It is then that the 8th Lord starts giving good effects because you have understood the purpose of your life. So, wherever the 8th Lord is placed in your chart, whichever house, the significations related to that house are where you must provide your service. For example, in the 4th house, you must serve your mother. In the 5th house, you must serve children. In the 2nd house, you must serve your family members. In the 3rd house, you must develop good relationships with your siblings. In the 7th house, you should work on your partnerships and your marriage. In the 10th house, you need to work on your career, your bosses. And in the 11th house, you need to improve the relationship with the elder sibling, and so on. So friends, if you like this video, please mark it as liked on YouTube. If you have not subscribed to our channel, you can do so by clicking the subscribe button. To know more about us, visit our website astroseva.tripod.com. For any consultations, please email us at astrosevaworld@yahoo.com and we'll be glad to assist you. So friends, thanks a lot. Bye. Take care and stay safe.